Another big CEO is out here talking about the benefits of XRP. We're going to be talking about spot ETF approval, XRP FI. We're going to talk about XRP strategies. We're also going to get in a ton of information about what's going on with the current market. Of course, there is some new information floating around Twitter about how much XRP is actually available for banks to buy. I wanted to take this a step further and look at banks, credit unions, as well as companies over $100 million. I'm going to go through all of that and more. We're also going to take a look at some other XRP updates in this video. I got some really great information towards the end about some new DeFi protocols making their way forward. And this is always going to help out liquidity and the ecosystem. So Digital Perspectives just said, I just backed the truck up and grabbed some XRP sub $2. Now, a lot of people have been asking Sensei, why are we going backwards here? What's happening? And I think it's pretty clear. If you showed up to my Sensei chats, which I do on Tuesdays and Fridays, we've had a very big and open conversation about markets slowing down in the summertime. If you go back to last year or even previous bull cycles, anytime we get into the summertime, people are traveling and there's just less things going on. And you're starting to see that. We also have some geopolitical events that are happening, on the other side of the world from us here in the United States. And you can actually see the correlation between those geopolitical events and the price for XRP or Bitcoin or whatever it is you want to look at. Just pull it up here, look at the last month, and you can see right when some of this news started to come out that there could be another war, crypto is massively affected by that. Let's go ahead and shift gears here. I'd love to see you on those live streams, guys. If you want to come ask questions, learn with us, grow with us, that would be fantastic. Last Tuesday, I shared a project called ANGL. That was a really unique project that launched on Wednesday. They are in the AI space. That was a 700% win for the people that had that information and were able to get in, when they launched. And so congratulations to all the people that did get in and made a very easy win this week. Let's go ahead and listen to what the CEO of BitGo is talking about with Ripple and XRP.
As a stablecoin business, you don't need, but do you want a master account?
At a Fed master account? Yeah, we'd love a Fed master account. Then we get to skip the banks. So if you go back in time in digital assets about 10 years, there's this company Ripple, you might have heard of them. They had originally decided they were going to try to tackle cross-border payments by use of their XRP token. And so the idea was that they would become the rails between banks, and then you would have a local on-ramp where you take dollars, convert it to XRP, zip it across the world, and then convert those XRP back to Mexican pesos or whatever. It turns out that's two conversions, right? And USD stablecoins are just better. So in fact, Ripple just launched a stablecoin, a US dollar-backed stablecoin. There's some talk in different countries about getting, a euro-backed stablecoin. And in fact, there is one. Circle has one. None of these have really taken off a lot yet, and I think it's because they're still just trying to get traction. But I do think we're going to see dollars become more of the rails across the world. I know there's a few countries that don't like dollars, but they'll probably get beaten into submission for it. So.
Yep. Probably.
Imagine as a retail user of this.
Really quickly, the reason this is so important for the United States is you're starting to see de-dollarization happen around the globe. And, there are some people living in certain countries that want the ability to save in dollars and to hold in dollars, but it can be very costly. If you've ever traveled to a different country and you are bringing your currency or you're bringing dollars and you're trying to change or currency swap between, maybe the local currency and US dollars, you could be being charged, 5% or even 10% fees. They could be astronomical. So being able to save in US dollars for pennies on the dollar, that can help a lot of families globally. And if you live in a country where the currency fluctuates a lot, maybe it's a peace of mind to have something a little bit more stable. And you do have some stable coins, euro-backed stable coins that have already launched on the XRP ledger. One example is EUROP. I thought that was a great name, but let's get back to this.
You put your money into the stablecoin. It's one-to-one backed. There's an audit that comes out twice a month that shows this one-to-one backed. At the end of each month, some coins get airdropped into your digital account, which is your interest on that. And if you ever need to send it to anybody, you can send it to everybody. At the farmer's market, you can tap two phones together and pay the producer of the food. At the coffee shop, you can use the point of sale mechanism. It just works super simple. Peer-to-peer plus peer to intermediary. I mean, the great thing about peer-to-peer is that it covers everybody. You can go into retail to business, retail to retail, business to business.
Well, a big shout out to Crypto Eerie for curating that clip. She does so much good work. If you're not following Crypto Eerie on X, you probably should. She's a incredible lady, and she knows so much about Ripple and XRP, and she's just a great pillar of the community. So I wanted to better understand, who BitGo is and why should we be paying attention to what the CEO is saying. BitGo is a leading digital asset infrastructure provider established in 2013, headquartered in Palo Alto, California. So that's my home. That's where I come from, the Bay Area. Love it. The company was founded by Mike Belshi, who you just saw. And then it talks about enhancing 1,500 institutional clients. They have 800 tokens that they support, and they are across 50 different countries. They also do security and custody, liquidity and trading, wallet and treasury management, DeFi, staking, and NFT support, as well as white labeling solutions. Just looking at some connections here between Ripple and XRP, as you can see, there's quite a lot here. I don't want to get into too much of this and take up too much of your time. If you want to pause the video and read this, please do. But it says BitGo was selected by Ripple to provide multi-signature security, advanced treasury management, and enterprise functionality for XRP. So a lot of good history here and a great partnership. All right. I'm always looking for new information, and sometimes people have really good ideas and they put that forward. And I feel like if we just took this idea and took a step further, maybe that could be really something. So let me go ahead and play this for you, and then I will give you, of course, my context and a lot more information.
Here we have the market cap of XRP at $5 trillion. We have 40 banks utilizing XRP. The price of XRP is at $48.51, and 99 billion XRP is circulating. So we're being very, very conservative here. Okay. If we were to split up the XRP to these 40 banks, each bank would get about 2.5 billion XRP. Wow. Wow, folks, that is absolutely nothing. And keep in mind, whatever that we are holding is also accounted for in this calculation. Do you see how scarce this asset is?
Really quickly, for banks to buy 2.5 billion XRP right now, that would be a give or take $4 to $5 billion investment. $5 billion investment, right? A lot of these banks are not going to invest $5 billion into Bitcoin or XRP or any crypto asset. So let's just be very clear on the cost that we're talking about here. I don't see that. I don't hear that being brought up in this clip, and it's a lot of money. So let's just be, transparent on that.
When will people wake up? And if we go down to 96 banks, okay, same layout, $5 trillion market cap, 99 billion circulating, each bank would hold on to about 1 billion XRP valued at $48 billion. But it gets even better. Let's go to 150 banks. That's only 660 million XRP per bank that they're going to be holding on to. And let's go over to 300 banks, 330 million XRP that they're going to be holding on to. Do you guys see this?
Okay, good explanation, but it just needed a little bit more. So let's better understand how many banks there are in the world, banks and credit unions. So just to give you some perspective here, there are commercial banks as of 2024, because it's pulling information from the past, obviously. There's approximately 10,153 global commercial bank businesses. So I believe a lot of what he was talking about here are going to be these much larger institutions, some of these institutions that other banks bank with, of course. And then we're talking about all banks, including smaller institutions. Other sources report a much broader count, with databases like Acuity Bankers Almanac listing 25,000 banks globally, and BankScope Global Banking Database claiming up to 32,000 public and private banking institutions. The number of independent banks, not just subsidiaries, is around 16,000. And then when you talk about credit unions, this is where 85,400 credit unions in 118 countries. That is a lot. So obviously there are an enormous amount of institutions, but you got to remember, not all of these, maybe a smaller percentage of them are actually going to follow through with either crypto treasuries or offering crypto custody or some type of using crypto for payments. Not all of these banks are going to make that switch, but some of the ones that are going to, want to save money or offer their customer these new services, they are going to push forward with all of this. So credit unions, according to the World Council of Credit Unions, at the end of 2018, there was 85,400 credit unions. That's crazy. And so here is a little bit more information here on the screen about banks and credit unions. And then I wanted to take this a step further. I said crypto is starting to be adopted by banks all over the world. Some banks will choose to use XRP for payments, tokenization, or some other type of crypto treasury. If 10%, 20%, and 50% of these banks or credit unions decided to offer XRP services, how much XRP would each bank need? Now, I don't think, I'm trying to show you just different examples here. I don't think that 50% of all banks are going to use XRP. That would just be an insane claim. I do think that these banks will have the option to use crypto or like XRP, but using it and having the option to are always two different things. So let's better understand kind of how I was looking at this number of banks and credit unions. We're pulling up that data, of course, from above, combined at roughly about 100,000 regulated financial institutions, either banks or credit unions. And then XRP use cases for banks, payments. XRP can be used as a bridge currency. They can be used as tokenization or crypto treasury. So just keeping flow with what we're talking about here. So the current circulating supply of XRP is now 59 billion. Now, when we research kind of how much XRP is on exchanges available, this number can vary anywhere from, I've seen, as low as like 5 billion. And I've seen realistically, 10 to 20 billion XRP. And I think that's probably the sweet spot of how much XRP is actually available. Now, the rest of XRP is going to, of course, be in the escrow. It's going to be in people like yours and my wallets. It'll also be in, other types of treasury management or other type of banks that are holding on to or are starting to get in crypto custody. They're obviously going to be buying some of these assets. How much XRP would each bank need? For banks and payments, the hard part, when he was reading through all of this is if banks want to use ODL, they don't really need to hold XRP. Now, the only way I see this happening is if banks offer crypto custody where they actually, buy this crypto themselves to sell it to customers at a later date. Realistically, though, I'm sure most of these banks will team up with, let's say Coinbase or other exchanges to offer live trading so the banks don't have to physically hold any crypto. But then when we're, just looking at this information about ODL, so you really have to consider, are these banks really going to hold XRP for payments or are they going to use Ripple solution for ODL? That's always a tough, question to answer, but we will, as we collect more and more data on this, I will bring it to you. Anyways, let's kind of fast forward here. Suppose 10, 20, or 50% of credit unions and banks offer XRP services. What is that going to look like? Example one, if each bank or credit union needed to hold 1 million XRP as a reserve for liquidity or treasury, 10,000 institutions would require, it would basically be 10 billion XRP. So if we got 10% of these financial institutions to buy 1 million XRP, that would take 10 billion off the open market. Now, that could deplete what is on exchanges pretty quickly. And then, of course, you would have retail and other kind of companies getting into this. Example two, if each institution needed 100,000 XRP, that would be, if each institution needed only 100,000 XRP, 10,000 institutions would require 1 billion XRP, 50,000 would require 5 billion XRP, etc., etc. Talks about real world use cases. We're not going to get into that. And then, is there enough XRP for mass adoption? Yes, for payments. For large reserves, if banks collectively decided to hold large reserves, billions of XRP each, the circulating supply would be quickly exhausted. However, this is not the current or likely use cases talking about. And of course, it talks about supply dynamics. And then I also wanted to take a look at how many companies, because we're starting to see, in all of these, Google, these different companies starting to push forward with some type of crypto treasury. And what I find very interesting is some companies are saying no to Bitcoin. They're obviously interested in crypto, but they're not interested in Bitcoin. Are they going to be interested in Ethereum or XRP or SUI or HBAR? I think the chances of that are very, very high. Anyways, looking at the globe here, there's no definitive global count, but the regional estimate is about 10,000 companies that have over $100 million or are valued more than $100 million. So if 5, 10, or 20% of these companies were to start buying XRP, that too could add a lot of buying pressure. So you can't just look at banks and credit unions. You also have to look at companies that are going to be setting up treasuries. All right. Crypto Aries posted this as well. Doppler Phi gave a keynote at XRPL Japan event. Soon they will introduce Ripple RLUSD Vault for earning yield. With BitGo as one of their custody partners, it's interesting that they are breaking down the deposit caps. Talks about XRP and Ethereum. Here is 8 to 9%. Wow, that is a really, really high percentage. I also wanted to take a look at, how much money is actually in RLUSD right now. 428 million. I know there's some people that think the growth of this is extremely slow. But if you listen to Brad Garlinghouse, he talked about this maybe about a month or two ago. He said that Q1 2025 numbers for RLUSD were far beyond what Ripple thought they were going to be able to accomplish. So I think they're on the right track to get all this handled. One other thing I wanted to talk to you guys about here is, the ability for Ripple to go out and hire some of the brightest minds, not in just business, but also in the cryptocurrency space. And so when you look at this lineup, Brad Garlinghouse, Chris Larson, Monica Long, David Schwartz, Christina Campbell, which we don't really hear too much about her because she's the CFO and she's of course stepped down, but notable. You also have board members, right? Let me see if I can zoom in on this real quick here. There we go. Anja Manuel, Ripple board member, former U.S. State Department official, co-founder Rice, Haley, Gates, and Manuel. So really well connected. Sandy O'Connor, she's a board member, former chief regulatory affairs officer at JP Morgan Chase, deeply tied to U.S. financial policy. I mean, where else are you going to find these types of people? And then also you have Rosie Rios. She's a board member. She's the 43rd treasurer of the United States. She worked under, it was Trump and Biden or Trump and Obama. Sorry, I don't have that exact, piece in my, but what I wanted to better understand is like, who do you compare Ripple's team to, right? What other blockchain companies have this kind of stellar, reputation? And so there's a few companies like Coinbase. I don't know about Ethereum. Anytime I hear Ethereum, maybe it was like ETHgate and just all of the shady things done by Joseph Lubin and Vitalik. I can't be on Team Ethereum ever. Anyways, Hedera Hashgraph has some really incredible people as well in Algorand. But what I'm trying to show you here is these companies are in a league of their own in the crypto space. These are the companies that I believe will still be here 5 or 10 years from now. And these are the companies I will be watching closely because these are the companies that I am placing my bets on. And hopefully those bets come in. All right, guys, I'll see you next time. Have a good week ahead. Take care of yourself. Crypto Sensei, aloha. Nothing in this video should be taken as financial advice. This is for entertainment purposes only. I am not a financial advisor. Please seek financial advice if you need it. Let's get back to the video.